What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Tactical Foul. I'm Kyle Grew, and today I have a great guest. He is not only one of the smartest guys I've had on the podcast. There's no debating at this point. I've had some very smart guests, but none of them are a doctor of physical therapy. He also does fitness and rehab for New Jersey Teamsters FC. He is also a grassroots football coach, soccer coach, however you want to look at it. Big change there, doctor to coaching little kids. We love it though. He's also the co-host of Soccer Fitness Experience podcast. He is the operator, runs football physios as well, and he has a lot of experience with all kinds of different teams, including North Carolina FC, El Paso Surf, and then Duke Club Sports. Without further ado, let me welcome Andy Seraphin.
Coach Kyle, it is a pleasure to be here on the Tactical Foul. Thank you so much for having me on the show today.
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate you coming on. I'm just glad that we were able to connect. Obviously, I've seen you on Twitter and different things like that. You interacting with different people all over the soccer world, and always a positive guy and stuff like that. So I was, with all of your experience and just the way that you interact with different people, it was a no-brainer that I wanted to reach out. And so I'm very fortunate that you responded to me. So thanks again for that.
Yeah, and I'm curious though, the Tactical Foul, where'd that name come from?
All right. So I don't know that I ever said this. Honestly, quarantine happened, right? And just kind of figuring things out. What am I going to do? Can't coach. And I always kind of want to start a podcast. So I'm there, and it's about 2:00 in the afternoon, and I start just like, all right. I texted like a friend of mine. I'm like, I'm going to do this. And so from 2 p.m. till 8 a.m. in the morning, I was up creating everything, thinking about like, what am I going to do? And then finally, I think it was about midnight when I was like, all right, let me I'm kind of like looking at different things online. I was like tactical. I was like foul. I was like, that's all right. Let me see if that's anywhere, right? Like I'll just search it anywhere. And I was like, oh, I like that a lot. And so I just kind of like a lot of trial and error with names, like seeing if they kind of fit, seeing if I liked it. And then after that, it was like, all right, let's do it. And then I was up till 8 a.m. creating the logo, creating the website, just kind of probably going way too far into it. I could have probably separated a little bit of the tasks over a few days, but it is what it is. But yeah, just kind of right off the dome came up with it, and we ran with it ever since.
Love it, man. Love it. Just going right in. And I could definitely empathize with probably going a little bit too deep into things and looking at the clock. And I was like, damn, like it like 8 hours just passed, like it happened so quickly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the funny, and I imagine that's true because I reached out to you right on Twitter, and it's late. We're both on, east, the east side. You're Michigan. I'm Michigan. You're in New Jersey, and it's probably 1 a.m. when I send you a tweet, a DM on Twitter, and I'm like, oh yeah, he'll get to me tomorrow. All of a sudden, it's 2 a.m. and I'm getting a response back. I was like, all right, this guy's probably up. He's a night owl just like I am, just kind of burning the midnight oil type thing. So,
yes, sir, definitely.
That's how it goes, right? Like, I mean, I think anyone that works obviously you work outside of it as well, but anyone that works within the game, right? Like, you're not really doing a whole lot during the morning except for maybe like looking at different things. You do training during the evenings, and then after that it's reflecting and like working on different things for the next day and things like that. At least it is for me and a lot of people I know. So I think you kind of have to be that way if you're going to be in the game, especially if you're coaching or doing anything like that, because it's evening time, and then you don't want to wait till the next day to think about it, right? While it's fresh, that's when you start to think about it. At least for me, I overthink, so I have to just get it off my brain immediately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like in fitness and rehab, it's somewhat similar. I mean,
Okay.
I feel like it can either go one of two ways. One, you get up really early, 5, 6 a.m. and getting everything out the way early, or do it late at night. And honestly, I thought the morning was the more common thing to do, and I thought I was like an outlier for doing things late at night. But then when I went to intern at Athletic Lab in North Carolina, the head coach there, Mike Young, I asked him like, yeah, like what time do you go to bed normally? He's like, oh, I'm a night owl. I do everything like late at night.
Right.
And I was like, you know what? You get me. It's possible. It is
Right.
possible. So I feel like I'm justified in my decisions.
That's awesome. So I do want to know because obviously going through, going to get your doctorate, right, and being a doctor of physical therapy, that's a lot of schooling and different things like that. And so obviously that was the main focus. But how did it become this where you focus primarily on soccer when it comes to this? Obviously, I'm sure you do other things, but I think your main focus is soccer when it comes to working with athletes and different things like that.
Yeah, I would say at this point, I do work full time in a physical therapy clinic
Right.
near my apartment. And it's a pretty general clinic. So we
Okay.
see everybody from the age of 8 to 80, all sorts of diagnoses. And at that clinic, it's not too much of a soccer or athletic
Okay.
population. And that's something that I've really explored in my off time. So right now, I'm seeing a soccer team in Bayonne called New Jersey Teamsters, and we'll
Yep.
be joining NISA pretty soon. So that's kind of my main soccer hub. And kind of on the side, I built a small business called the Football Physios, where I help athletes around the world, helping with fitness, rehab, improving their speed, strength, and stamina, whatever they need on the physical side. I focus with them through online training with that. And I kind of got into that by I remember my Instagram page. It actually used to be football injuries, American football,
Okay.
and I used to float around. And I was like, you know what? I'm a big Giants fan. Let me focus in on New York Giants injuries. And I was kind of going through posting this, that, and whatever. And then about 3 years ago, possibly 4 years ago, Odell Beckham Jr., he broke his ankle.
Right. Yep.
And I posted about that, and that was like poof, it went off.
Oh wow.
And ever since then, I was like, you know what? Like, and I was a first year PT student at the time. I was like, this is kind of fun. Like, I want to do this. But I'm like, you know what? I like American football, but I don't love it.
Right.
Right. But soccer, I love that. So let me get into that. So I started tracking injuries, um, reporting as to the structure that was injured, about how long they'd be out for. And people really liked it because it was new original content. And at the time, there weren't many people doing it. Now it's a little bit different. But yeah, I enjoyed it and kind of just took off from there.
No, that's really cool, and I agree because like there's a lot of content when it comes to just about everything, including soccer, right? But like I don't think there's really not much content when it comes to like the injuries and the rehab and I guess like the pre-injury stuff like that, like worrying about that stuff. So it is really cool to be able to look at those different things because we kind of were talking about it before. Like I'm a guy that I know the game for the most part. Obviously, there's a lot to learn, and I'll never know everything. But like I feel pretty well versed in a lot of things when it comes to just like on field stuff, tactics, different things like that. But when it comes to the injuries, injury prevention, different things like that, I'm at a total loss, and I'm kind of just scrambling, trying to find people. So it is cool to have that resource when it's really not. It's pretty scarce. So I think that was one, especially if it's something you're into, right? Like obviously you care about it. Plus, I think it brings a lot of value to people. I think it's awesome. So kudos to you for finding that and obviously sticking with it. So I do want to ask though, because you're talking about you went from football. Where did that kind of? You said you love soccer. Did that start really young? Did you play growing up and different things like that?
Yeah, so that's actually kind of interesting. My parents are both Haitians. So
Okay.
in Haiti, the only sport we
Yeah.
really play, we have two really. We have soccer and we have taekwondo.
Yeah.
And you haven't met my parents or anything like that, but trust me, they are not the type to do anything fight sport related.
Fair
so
enough.
I was put on a soccer team. I was probably 3 or 4 years old, and honestly, I wasn't that good. And it was interesting because I stuck with the sport because I enjoyed it, and
Right.
I didn't play travel or club or anything like
Okay.
that. I just played on my town recreational team. Started when I was 3. I played every year until I left high school.
Oh wow.
Um, so yeah, I played my entire youth career or youth life, and then went to college, and I found out, oh, they have college intramurals. Still played there. And then I graduated from Temple, went to Duke, and they still had intramurals. So I kept playing. And now I'm kind of in a weird space where I'm not really in school anymore, and COVID leagues are shut down. But
Yeah.
I try to pop in on co-ed leagues and things like that. And I think that's one really important message to bring home to players is when you're done with the game, one, can you keep playing?
Right.
Right? Can you still love the game? Can you still find a role for yourself? And number two, when you do eventually exit the game, do you have a role where you can stay in the game as something other than a player? So as a physio, as a coach, as a GM, as a manager,
Right.
equipment manager, anything really. Do you love the game and do you want to continue with that? Because if the passion is there as a player, I think the passion will be there to serve in another role.
No, absolutely. And I think like um, when I kind of throw my like coaching hat on, right? Like that's as much as I want to create like the best players, the best teams, those different things. Like at the first thing, right? Like I talk to people is like yes, like I coach for a club that is highly competitive. We play all over the state, all over the country, really. But at the end of the day, as much as I take this serious because it's my love and it's my job and different things like that, at the end of the day, it's a game, and it's supposed to be fun, right? Like, and that's what you want, right? Is like you want these kids to be having fun to where, like you're talking about, like no matter what it is, whatever point in your life you're at, you still love it. Either you're playing it, you're watching it, you're getting involved in some way. Like that's the legacy we want to create. Is like it's not just like a game; it's like a culture, right? Like because that's the only way that this game becomes, you can cultivate it into something bigger, and hopefully that leads to more success and just better brand of the game all around the country. Obviously that's a much bigger topic, but like from where we can affect it, right? Like at the grassroots and like youth level, you just want these kids to like love the game and not just love it for the little period of time that you have them, but continue to love it. That way, like their kids are playing, like when they have kids and different things like that, and then it just keeps going, and it's a legacy thing. So, no, I for sure agree that that's the number one thing that we can do is create this legacy of the game of love and passion for it. And if we do nothing else, like then it's still a success in my eyes.
Exactly, 100% agree with that.
Um, I do wonder because for me, growing up, I don't come from like a soccer background as far as like my family or my community, right? My community is football, it's baseball, those type of things. But what we were able to do with a group that we had was kind of, you know, bring a lot of soccer players together and create this like pickup culture that then cultivated into something a little bit bigger where a lot of players were able to feed off that and do bigger things because we had that little pocket of kids or somewhat young adults and different things like that. You being from New Jersey, obviously not being that far from New York either, did you have that type of community or was it kind of like all American like the other sports besides soccer?
I think it's kind of half and half.
Okay.
Most of the people who I definitely play pickup a ton and played a lot more pickup games than I went to structured practices and
Right.
everything like that. But most players had a team that they were on,
Right.
either the rec team of my town, the high school team, a high school team nearby, or a nearby club. And our seasons, since they're a little bit on the shorter side, right? So high school
Right.
soccer, it's like 10, 12 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Club soccer, we had a small league. We only had 3 or 4 teams in our league, so that was only a few weeks. And I think the biggest kind of time for pickup was during the summer.
Yeah, for sure.
And we kind of just all conglomerated, really. We just found each other, and it'd be like me and my group of friends, and then eventually we'd see like another group across the pitch, and we're like, hey, we got five, you got five, you guys trying to do 5-on-5? And then boom, that's a group chat, right? So now we got 10.
Right.
And then we start adding people here and there. And I think that's something that people of our generation can really relate to, because now we have things like WhatsApp and things like Group Me and Instagram, where
Yeah.
you can really just connect with each other.
Oh, for sure.
And even now here in Hoboken, where I'm living, tons of pickup groups on like meetup.com in New York, in New Jersey. I just joined one actually last week for a club that plays in Jersey City.
Okay.
And I went on meetup.com and I clicked join, and then I was playing with them 2 days later.
Oh,
And
that's
I
awesome.
love how that culture is able to be done here.
No, I think that's amazing. The only thing that I've ever kind of like, the only sport that I think is like that is basketball. That's really the only. That's the next closest thing, right? Like where you can just kind of like get people, go out to a field or court, and just like start playing. You don't really. I mean, you can do that with the other sports, but I just think it's way more common with soccer and basketball. I think it's just easier to get people, and I think anywhere you're around that you have that, where you have like a consistent, not necessarily group, but just consistent, games going on, different things like that, you tend to see like the soccer is usually raised and like the level gets a little bit higher. Um, I'm not from like a big area. Like the place I'm in is pretty small, for the most part in comparison. But like Hoboken, obviously is a pretty big area, and it's relatively close to other big areas. Um, I've always been fascinated by like because I've seen like different things. I've seen like apps being built and different things like you talked about for like pickup games and different things like that. Um, I guess I always wondered like how big that is, like how big those networks are, and like how many different people are kind of coming in when you're in these big cities, and if it's still like as pure as it is, even like when I'm talking in my little area where we get like 12 people or whatever.
Yeah, it's I think in the bigger cities, you would be surprised about how organized some of these pickup groups are.
Okay.
So, for example, the one group I went to a few days ago, it was my first time going, and normally you have to pay like a small fee, like $2 a game,
Yeah.
because in particular, this team or this pickup group had a field permit, which is
Oh.
very rare.
Okay.
And it was at night. It was like a 7:30 game,
Oh
and they
wow.
had the lights on, which is also rare. So I walk onto the pitch, and they say, "Oh, are you new here?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm Andy." And they're like, "Oh, you're number 3 on the blue team." And I'm like, "Oh, this is
Oh
this is
wow.
organized. Like, here we go." Yeah. So I mean, it goes all the way up from that level of organization where you have to pay $3 and be there on time, otherwise you're not playing.
Right.
Period, versus the pickup groups from back home where I'm from, where if you say the game's at 4:30, you really show up at 5:30 and you stretch and do whatever till
Yeah.
6
Yeah. Yeah.
type
Yeah.
of thing.
For
So
sure.
it's a pretty big spectrum.
No, that's yeah, and that's kind of what I wondered is if it was more like that, and that's really cool. Like, I mean, I I think both have their place and both are great, but like that kind of level of stuff where like we kind of show up. It's very similar to what you're talking about. Like, luckily we're coaches, so we have pugs and we have pennies. We throw some out. All right, somebody picks teams. All right, you're on that team. You're on that team. Let's go, and we play, and it's kind of there. But it would be nice to just be like, yep, team, 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 team. It's done, and like it's
Yep.
organized for you like that. That sounds absolutely amazing. Um, so I guess I want to talk about a little bit. I have you on, like I said. I'm gonna pick your brain on different things like that. So I am very curious when it comes to some of like the changing things that you've seen. Obviously, pretty you're you're pretty new out of like college. You not that long since you've been out of college. What in that time that like you started kind of going through school and different things? What kind of changes have you seen when it comes to like the fitness and rehab in the game of soccer?
So I'll say this: when I was interning at North Carolina FC in their youth academy in the training room, that was probably my first exposure to an environment where players had immense soccer talent.
Right,
Because growing up, again, I wasn't that good. I was on my rec team playing teams maybe 10, 15 miles down the road.
for sure.
And, just chatting with them, I asked, like, "Oh, where's your game this weekend?" 1 week, Florida. And I'm like, "Whoa, wait, you're in high school. You're going to Florida
Yeah.
for a game?" And they'd be like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. What's next week?" "California." "What's the week after?" "Ireland." And I'm like, "Whoa." Like the travel demands of youth soccer,
It's crazy.
it's crazy, and it's gone through the roof. I'm not sure if that's how it was when I was younger, but I think that's something that that definitely needs to be addressed is some of these kids, they're growing, they're in school, and they have the travel demands of a professional athlete.
Yeah.
And to me, that's something that is one, unacceptable, but two, very surprising.
Do you, like what kind of impact do you think like that has? Where like obviously like these kids are probably training, I don't know, 3 to 4 days a week, and then also traveling on top of that. And they're not adults. Their bodies are not yet fully matured and different things like that. What kind of impact do you think that, that could have on them if not handled properly?
Yeah, so recovery is huge, along with sleeping, eating, hydration. Those I think are the main points of recovery that most people, honestly, they do know that it's important, but they think things like ice baths and compression sleeves can kind of, skirt around that.
Right.
But those three, sleeping, eating, and hydration, are going to be the keys to recovery. And if you're going on a road trip, chances are all three of those are going to be pretty poor, right? You're not
Right.
going to sleep well because you're traveling. You're not going
For
to eat
sure.
well because let's face it, you're stopping at Chick-fil-A, McDonald's,
Yeah.
whatever you get.
Absolutely.
And you can hydrate, you can, but in general, your recovery isn't going to be that good. That and like the mental toll it takes, right? Do you really think a 13-year-old wants to travel across the country? Do they want to play a game across the country? Yes, but the actually act of traveling,
Yeah.
they
Right.
probably don't want to do.
It's not that fun.
Um, it's really really not. And I mean, you've definitely been in those long car rides where it's like, are we here yet? No. Are we here yet? No. And
Yeah. Right.
I mean, again, I haven't been in that environment, but something about it tells me that doing that for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, at the end of that time span, you might not love the game as much as you did at the beginning. And that kind of goes back to what we talked about at the beginning. Do you love the game? And if we're losing players and we're losing the love for the beautiful game because of things like traveling across the country, well, maybe it's time we investigate to see if that's necessary.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what ends up happening is I think the kids that find like greater success after, they of course are going to continue to love the game because they have opportunities. But there's always going to be like even on elite teams for the most part, there's going to be kids that somewhat fall through the cracks and aren't going to make it to that next step or whatever it is. Um, and yeah, I think those are the kids that we worry like that you talk about like they probably are like I just gave 6 7 years of like sacrificing, a normal like childhood for the most part, because that's what you have to do to like. There's a like that's the thing is like there's so much sacrifice that has to be made for like these professional athletes to become what they're gonna be, and then the ones that don't make it, like that's devastating. And then like, yeah, like how like that's like now like you want them to have love and passion for that thing that they just put their entire life into and it didn't work out the way that they had hoped. I think that's really hard to ask anybody, especially you're probably talking about an 18-year-old kid, 17-year-old kid. Like no, they're emotional and like they're going to probably have a lot of resentment towards the sport now because of that. Um so yeah, I think that it's a fine line. I think that it can work out. I think that there's um these kids do want to compete and want to have these opportunities, but I agree that like we probably have to make sure you are like it's under a microscope, like watching them and like making sure it's not going too far.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And even from a like more of a population health standpoint, right? So now you have an 18-year-old who has exited the game,
Right.
and chances are that that game was their only opportunity for physical fitness,
Yeah,
and it's the
absolutely.
only thing they know and love to do that can keep them physically fit. And now what, right? If you're able to keep someone's love for the game and keep them active through their 20s, I mean, the research says that whatever habits you do in your 20s and early 30s, that's probably what you're going to do for the rest of your life,
Right, for sure.
right? So that there's a pretty big impact there too.
No, absolutely. I mean, I can say that like I found it tough like transitioning out of playing and then you know obviously I was playing pickup, but then when pickup opportunities or like men's league opportunities weren't there, it becomes really hard because that's my habit is like I stay in good enough shape because like I have this routine, but then when that's completely taken out, what do you do? And it's like, oh man, now you gotta you have to reevaluate. And so like I still love the game, so I was willing to play. But if you take a kid that like they're like, all right, that's the only thing I did for exercise. Now I don't want to do it at all. Yeah, they're not gonna do any exercise, and that's bad. Absolutely. Um, I I am curious because I I coach I coach a lot. I coach both sides, but at the older end, which I think is probably where we look. I mean, obviously the young kids are important too, but I think you start to see more injuries with the older kids, and so I have like high school age girls. What are some, and obviously I think for me, and I might be wrong. This is what I would like to know is like, what's the difference when you use your strategies for pre and post rehab or just working out when it comes to girls and then when it comes to boys.
So let's start with the little kiddos with this
All
one,
right.
the six,
Abs-
7, 8 year olds.
Absolutely.
Um, Honestly, when kids are that young, they have, in terms of performance and playing the game of soccer, there's little to no difference. And this is why at the younger age ranges, some clubs or teams, they allow the males and the females, the boys and girls to be mixed,
Yeah, for sure.
because from a coordination standpoint, from a growth standpoint, they're pretty identical,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? Where things start to get a little bit different is during puberty, where girls will actually develop faster
Yep.
than the boys, which is why we see the split. Um, Going into high school, and I think that split is important because that split, believe it or not, is where resources tend to be allocated differently.
Yep.
Um, if you look at the injury data and all of the research, it will show that girls have higher concussion occurrence, right? Higher ACL, higher injury in general. And if you look at it and you might say, hey, maybe girls are just more injury prone. Well, is it that? Or is it the fact that female teams get less support, right? Maybe, and this is honestly a real reality, do they have the same support in terms of coaching, strength and conditioning, rehab, a club physician, everything, right? And it's, you see it at the club level and going up towards the university level. I think a very prime example of resources being given differently is if you look at college American football and everybody else,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, for
You'll
sure.
see that, the football facility, they got recovery pools, they have this, they
Yeah.
have that, they have everything you possibly need. You go across the street to literally the other facility where everybody else trains completely different. And I think before we start to say, hey, the female body is more injury prone or resistant or whatever, you look at the environment that they're in and you say, do we have an equal distribution of resources? And examine that and go through that fully and then say, okay, let's look at other factors.
So when I would say when so like from like my perspective where like I'm coaching in like the youth club situation and I would say that it's an equal playing field for both boys and girls in that setting where it's kind of just like everyone kind of gets the same, you know, differences in coaching, different things like that. But for the most part, they're on equal footing. When that is the reality, and granted, you're right. Like I don't think that's the reality for a lot of things, just in general, right? Like college, high school, like even like academies and different things like that. I think you would probably be 100% correct on that. But like in like the youth game, when it is there is there different strategies when it does come to like the girls and the boys though?
Like in terms of just physical performance.
Yeah, like I guess when you are looking at it from like the fitness and rehab portion of it, do you treat them differently, or do you think maybe that's one problem is they are getting treated differently and not pushed the same as the boys, which is why maybe the girls get injured more because they're not put through the same regiments and different things like that?
So I'll say this. I think that women tend to take training more seriously
Yeah.
than men, and they can be left and trusted to do their routines
Yep.
a lot more than a male can. That's just kind of my experience and my perspective from it. I think that, I mean, maybe that's part of the path that they have to take, because being a female athlete in the United States, it's not easy,
Right.
right? You have to be self-driven. You have to have your own routines, because if you don't, you're more likely to fall through the cracks.
For sure.
So yeah, I think that's the main difference. Is I think that they have a lot more drive and motivation, and I think they're also more responsible in their rehab too. But
Yeah, I would probably agree. Just considering that, like, I went through rehab. Like, I suffered knee injuries. One, like, first was like a meniscus, which really wasn't all that bad. Didn't get surgery. Um, you know, but rehab probably not as well as I should have, right? And then it was other injuries, right? Like I tore my MCL and I came back a lot faster than I should have. And I'm not alone in doing that. And I probably have problems to this day because of those things where I do agree, like, you see these girls and they're like, yeah, I'm supposed to be out for this amount of time. I didn't even know how long I was supposed to be out. I was just like, well, I feel better. I'm going to go play now. Right? Like, and I think like that's, it's not everybody. It's not, but I would say that, like, if you did like a study group and you took 100 boys, 100 girls, they all had the same injury, the boys are probably going to come back faster, regardless if they should or not, than the girls, just because they're like, nah, yeah, I'm fine. I feel good. I'm going to go. And the girls are going to probably more often say, I'm going to just listen to the guy who, has a degree, because he probably knows better, and I'm gonna follow that. So
yeah, I think the listening is probably the biggest part,
yeah,
because kind of
yeah,
like you mentioned, your doc probably did tell you, hey, you should be out for this long, but
yeah, probably.
your mind might have been out there a little bit. So
Yeah, no,
it just,
absolutely.
yes, sir.
No, that and so I guess the one thing, and we've kind of talked about like some things that you would like that you're not necessarily fond of when it comes to like how we handle some of the youth game. But what are some big changes just from like the physical, like the fitness, the rehab, the injury prevention side? What's some things that you think, like, from your perspective, being in the coaching game a little bit, what are some things that need to change, especially for the youth game right now?
For the youth game, I think we really need to look at strength and conditioning not as an option, but as a priority,
Okay.
because we need to set these kids up to have a sustainable career.
Right.
And the youth game is filled with injuries that, honestly, a large amount of them can be prevented. Most ACL, hamstring injuries, ankle sprains, they can't be completely prevented, but we
Right.
can reduce their risk by a tremendous amount by just doing a simple strength and conditioning protocol. We're starting to see a little bit with some clubs, some youth clubs doing the FIFA 11 plus program to increase player strength in the lower extremity overall. But I think that's one thing that really needs to be implemented. And like it or not, I think it's going to happen
Right.
pretty quickly, because you get stronger and you get faster because of it, and because of that, you will win games. If
Oh,
you
for
look
sure.
at any game, regardless of level, goals are scored when players are running fast and when players are jumping high and being strong.
Yeah.
And yeah, the technical ability that has to come, and that should be number one. But physical is right there, I think, right below it, in the fact that if you don't have the underlying physical characteristics, you can't keep up when you're
Yeah.
sprinting, or you can't jump high on a corner, or you don't have the stamina to do those things at minute 90.
No, absolutely. I think with this, like, when people hear that, and then that's where like you have both sides of the aisle with this argument where it's like, the best, if our best athletes would play soccer, we'd be the best in the world because we have the best athletes. It's like, no, there's a difference. I think in we have to understand that there's like it's categories, right? Like there's certain types of athleticism. There's soccer athleticism, like, is different than, say, the way that athleticism is used in basketball or football and things like that. So being a good soccer athlete may not translate to those sports the same way that being a good, American footballer may not translate to the soccer field, And so like I think that's what you're kind of like. So you have to be a good soccer athlete. And there's no doubts about it. As much as it doesn't look like some of these guys are good athletes, they are, right? Like they may not be the fastest or the strongest, but their endurance is incredibly high. And so it's like you're saying, like their fitness doesn't let them down, to the point where in minute 90 they can't make the right decision because they're lagging behind and they're getting really tired, and so that pass doesn't get enough weight behind it or different things like that. And so I think that's the thing there is like people were like, well, blah blah blah. It's like no, specific, and like they like to argue it. But I agree. I think athleticism's huge, and when you're the fittest team, you tend to win, a lot of times, because especially when it's like if it's even matched and you're the fitter team and you're able to run longer, you're gonna win, like
Gonna
almost
win.
almost always, right? So I agree, and that's why we talked about it a little bit. Like that's why I started trying to implement, more of that stuff in. I bought like, resistance bands and things like that for my girls to use for stretching, but also we use different. We did a lot more fitness over the summer, trying to get them more fit and different things like that. Um, One, right, because it's like we talked about, the fitter teams win a lot of times, but two, if you are getting them in better routines, you're getting them fitter. Um, it's not going to prevent injuries. It's not, because injuries can happen regardless of how fit you are. But it can, I think, for me, my opinion, and your opinion matters a lot more on this. But, my opinion is, if you are fitter and you're taking care of your body and like working out more, the prevention can be higher, when you do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and especially at the coach level, right? Because as an individual player, you might not notice that you're healthy the entire season because to yourself that is the expectation, that
Right.
is normal.
Yeah.
But from a coaching perspective, when it's that late tournament in June where you normally have, let's say you have a squad of 23 and you normally have 17, 18 healthy players at that point, when you have 20, you're like, oh, that's a big game
Yeah,
changer,
for sure.
right? Now my rotation could be different. My team is healthier. I could win this tournament because of that. And at youth sports, especially, depth is important, and having your whole squad healthy has a very big part in that.
No, absolutely, and so that's something that affected me drastically this year. Is I lost two girls who, to be fair, are actually two of the more fit girls on my team. They do stuff outside of training and different things like that. But you lose them to injury, and then you see like the depth goes down, and you have to pull different people in, and it hurts. So, and it had me thinking on this is like, with these extended breaks that we've had, obviously with quarantine, and I'm not saying that shouldn't or whatever it is, but with them, do you think that there's been at least either short or long term negative impacts on the players and different things like that?
Yeah, let's explore this at different levels too. So at the professional level,
Yeah, for sure.
injuries are up.
Yeah,
They're
absolutely.
definitely up. And that data is widely available. The amount of hamstring injuries
Right.
and muscular injuries that we've seen this year is it's I believe we're almost at the point where for this season, which started late, we've almost matched the total for the previous season,
Wow.
which is incredible.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because the professional game these days is so intense,
Yeah.
right? And if you look at the sprinting distance and the high speed running distance, high intensity actions, right? So not really jogging, but those full field sprints that you see players do, especially on teams like Liverpool. That number is up 50% from 10 to 15 years ago,
Wow.
which it's not a long time ago. And you'll really look at it when you look at, and I saw this over the summer when FIFA was putting out those retro games from World Cup 98, 90,
Yeah, for sure.
94, 2002. You look at those games and you're like, man, these guys are slow.
Yeah.
Like, what in the world is going on here? It's because the game is a lot more intense. And
Yeah.
because of that, you'll see an increase in soft tissue injury. And you kind of saw it over quarantine when players were posting a lot on Instagram about their workouts. Is a lot of players have a lot of different things they can use at home for their strength and conditioning.
For sure.
For example, Paul Pogba, he
Yep.
has a full pitch in his basement.
Oh, it's great. Love it.
not a full pitch, but
Yeah.
he's
Oh
got a
yeah. It's
little
a
grass
little
field.
five aside thing, yeah, going on.
Exactly. He's got a little Paul Pogba logo in the middle. Looks so nice. Sergio Ramos, you could train probably 6 to 8 athletes at a time in his at-home facility.
Right.
Crazy. Now, if you drop down to teams in possibly even the same league or the division below that, tiny house in London, they don't have that there.
Right.
And you go down to the college level, now you have players who they don't even know, they've never met their coach in person before, right?
Yeah.
Completely new team, new league, new division, new everything. And it's tough for them to execute because chances are, again, youth soccer, they may or may not even have strength and conditioning experience. Now they're being given a workout packet. They've never had a workout packet in their life before. They're 17, 18 years old, and we wonder why they get injured. It's tough to deal with, but when you look at it and kind of compare what we've had in the past to what we have now, I think it's pretty clear.
And I'm always like so kind of like caught in two minds with this because like it kind of goes to what you're talking about, right? Like when we look at like where the game is now and like how fast it is compared to what it was and different things, like that kind of speaks to one, the game's evolved obviously, but I think like the athleticism of the athletes have evolved. So I always, it's always kind of confusing to me how, and this is just because of my lack of knowledge obviously, but like you would think with these higher caliber athletes you would possibly get less injuries. um, why is it though that even as the athletes evolve, the injuries seem to be there's more of them? Is it just because like yeah, there might be a little bit better, but like it just still can't you can't beat the fact that you're gonna pull a muscle or whatever if you're moving at these high speeds for too long.
Yeah, and the human body is very human.
Yeah,
It's
right.
there is Superman has kryptonite,
Yeah, for
so
sure.
injuries will always happen because of that. And part of the benefits of really taking charge of your strength and conditioning is not only preventing them, but if it does happen, maybe we can make it less severe. But yeah, with these higher caliber athletes, maybe you've seen this before too, right? You get someone who's an absolute speed animal, endurance animal,
Mm-hmm.
but what if they're playing on two teams?
Yep.
Right? What if they just finished their high school indoor track season when they were running long distance, 2-3 miles at a time, 4 time, and now they're doing soccer,
Yep.
literally the next week, right? And they haven't changed direction in 3 to 4 months, right? So again, where do they start? Where do they end up? And let's examine that.
That's interesting to me. So I guess that's a kind of a question that maybe you can answer is like when it comes to these athletes, especially the younger athletes, and like going into high school and different things like that. Do you see like what's your view on them playing multiple sports? Do you think that's something that can help them with that, where like they're doing different sports, so they are used to different movements from all kinds of different things, or do you think it can be somewhat negative if they're playing a sport where they're doing the complete opposite of what they would be doing, and then they go to like a quick twitch sport, it's going to lead to more injuries?
I think you have to look at it a little bit case by case.
Okay.
And I think it comes down to the child itself
Okay.
at that point. And I think goes back to what we started talking about at the beginning. Do they enjoy it?
Right.
If you have an athlete that says like, man, I love soccer, but I also love basketball.
Yeah.
Like I need to do both, right? Then let's make it happen.
Right,
Let's
for
do
sure.
both.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that that's something that's very, very doable. But then you start to look at the soccer landscape and with some of these club teams, 10.5 month season,
Yeah.
right? And you may have to give something up at that point
Yeah.
because, again, not Superman, right? And don't give yourself kryptonite at the same
Yeah,
point.
for sure.
Don't make that choice. So, yeah, I think multiple sports is a very good idea because one, it'll expose you to different things you could continue for the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
But two, it'll expose you to different movements too. And in soccer, we see a lot of repetitive motions, and by doing another sport, you can I think expand that a little bit. And where it's really really tough, and I think most kids probably need some help is the transition of going from one sport to another without having any big increases in load to the human body.
And that makes, yeah. I had to think about everything you just said for a second, just because, like, yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense, and I definitely am not someone that's against people playing more than one sport, but it does go back to what we talked about, right? Like these kids, and it's a tough thing, right? Like I'm not saying that we are personally, but we ask these kids, like, if they want to be at these high levels, like you're gonna have to make a lot of sacrifices, and unfortunately, those extra sports or those other things are things that you probably have to sacrifice. Now, I think that's probably maybe 5 to 10% of the kids that play travel soccer, right? Like, and it's probably lower than that, even honestly. It's probably five. It's probably less. It's probably five or less if I really think about it. That really have no extra time. Where like we have kids that are playing all over the country for our team and like doing good things. They're winning state cups, but at the same time, they're able to go play other sports like basketball or different things like that. So it's like it's doable, without a doubt. But I agree that like if it's not maintained and the transition isn't done properly and they're not given enough like break time, right? Like if they're going right from basketball game to a soccer practice every single day and then vice versa, that's probably, I'm guessing, where we're gonna start seeing injuries and body breakdown, I would assume.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think a very important concept to understand here is the role of communication between coaches,
Okay.
because that is something that it's helpful, and especially for the club coaches out there who have players who play on different teams within the club. Like let's say a very talented player plays up for a few games and comes back down. You're in constant communication with that other coach, right?
Right.
You're saying, hey, he or she played this amount of minutes and they attended practice on Monday and Wednesday, so they can be with you on Tuesday, Thursday, and making sure that the player isn't overloaded. Well, maybe we need to do that with their basketball and track and field and football coaches too, right? Establish that communication so that way they can transition safely, right? So what if that one coach that you haven't reached out to, what if you reach out to them maybe a month and a half before your season starts and says, hey, you have one of my players and I want to make sure they're ready for my season, but fully enjoy the rest of yours. Do you think you can implement a few things for them for me so that way they're ready for me? And in turn, I will make sure at the end of my season, I will do the same for you. And if everybody does that, like that transition will be a lot better.
I definitely agree. Unfortunately, I think you run into the situation where one, I think the first one is people are not just like are either afraid or not willing to like kind of bridge that gap and make that communication, right? And then two, you not always, but unfortunately, I think when it comes to like sports in general, whether it's coaching, whatever it is, you do get you get ego, and I think so. Like, that's what kind of gets in the way, and I think the ego will get in the way of what's best for the player, right? Because what's best for the player is exactly what you're talking about, right? Like, let's have a relationship where you help me, I help you, and in turn, we're both going to help our player. But and I'm not saying it will always happen, but if I were to uh, say that to someone's basketball coach or volleyball coach, hey, they might be like, no, like this is my season, this is my player now. Like you can when she's done here, you can have her, right? Or he, whatever it is. And I think you run into that too often, and the player kind of gets lost in translation there, and it's like we're not really actually doing what's best for the player anymore. So I think in a perfect world, what you are saying happens. Unfortunately, I think way too often we're not living in a perfect world. I think we both can we see that for sure.
That's true. And if you're in that world, maybe try to compromise. But
Yeah.
again, not Superman, right? So sometimes things happen.
No.
And yeah, it's sad but true. Sad but true.
No, absolutely. Before we get out of here, I do want to talk about your football physios and what you offer on that. and everything that's kind of going on with that, because it's something definitely important that you have going on. So I'm just going to let you take the floor and just kind of explain what you have going on there.
Yeah, so football physios, you can find us on Instagram if you just search the football physios, football with a U, or you search my name, Andy Seraphin, you'll be able to find it. Offering everything for soccer players as it relates to speed, strength, stamina, online training, or if you happen to live close to me, we can meet in person. Working both teams and individuals. So if you need anything on the physical side of the game, I got you. So feel free to send me a message.
No, that's awesome. And I do want to know, because I think you're in the same boat that I am, and in terms of like what you're talking about probably was more of a in-person thing, and you have to make that a big transition to where like everything almost for the most part for a while there had to be virtual. Was there anything that you added to your repertoire or maybe learned over that period where everything kind of had to be virtual?
Yes. So by necessity, doing strength training online, it's a little bit of a different skill set, and a lot of the things I would do with my hands physically, I had to learn how to say them out loud and communicate them in a way where a whole room of 10 to 12-year-old boys can understand it.
Right.
So that's kind of trial and error and seeing what works and what doesn't. So that's one thing I learned. And another thing was I kind of got into more of the sports science world of things. So I got pretty deep into Excel and Google Sheets and player monitoring and tweaking a bunch of formulas to give you what you want in the end. And something that I still do and I still love doing and looking forward to pursuing that more in the future.
Oh, that's awesome. And I'm glad that you are doing everything you're doing. I'm glad that you got out of the American football world and brought it back home to the actual football world with everything you're doing. I think you're doing a lot of great things. Before we fully get out of here, I want to give this opportunity to you to plug anything you got going on. Let everybody know where they can find you and all those things.
Yeah, at the Andy Seraphin on Twitter, at the Football Physios on Instagram. Releasing a new ebook soon, all about preventing the risk of hip flexor injury. It's almost like a hip flexor prehab. It's going to be part of
Wow.
a series I'm releasing, so stay on the lookout for that.
No, that's awesome. And then obviously your soccer fitness experience podcast as well. I'll definitely be listening to that because, like I said, a lot of good things I learned here. I imagine there's a lot more things that I can learn from you there, your ebook, and all those things. Andy, I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun, very informative, and I look forward to talking to you very soon.
All righty, and thank you so much, Coach Kyle. Happy to be on, and yeah, peace and love to everybody listening.
Thanks so much. This has been Tactical Foul. I'm Kyle Guru. We'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.